The sun blazed mercilessly over the Colorado plains as Jacob McKenna stood alone in his cabin doorway, watching 500 warriors emerge from the morning mist like shadows given flesh. Painted faces, eagle feathers, and war lances caught the golden light as Apache, Cheyenne, Comanche, Navajo, and Ute riders formed a perfect circle around his isolated ranch. Their horses snorted and stamped, sending dust clouds spiraling into the desert air. Jacob's weathered hand rested on his Colt revolver, but he knew it was useless against such overwhelming numbers. The banishment from Copper Ridge had left him defenseless, cut off from any hope of rescue. His cattle lowed nervously in their pan, sensing the tension that crackled like lightning before a storm. The nearest warrior, a towering Apache with a lightning bolt painted across his chest, raised his lance toward the sky. Behind him, pack horses carried mysterious bundles wrapped in buffalo hide. Were these gifts of honor or the tools of his execution? Jacob's throat felt dry as sandpaper. After 20 years of frontier life, he had learned to read the signs of impending violence. But something about this gathering felt different. The warriors sat motionless, almost reverent, as if waiting for some sacred signal. But what happened next would silence the entire prairie for generations to come. 3 days earlier, Jacob had been mucking stalls in the pre-dawn darkness, his routine as predictable as the sunrise. At 52, the widower had built his ranch through pure stubbornness and calloused hands. His wife Sarah's grave marker stood beneath the lone cottonwood tree, the only company he had known for 5 long years. The wind carried the scent of sagebrush and distant rain as he fed his horses, each movement mechanical and lonely. Copper Ridge lay 12 miles east, close enough for supplies, but far enough to avoid the townsfolk's judgmental stares. They tolerated his presence but never welcomed it, viewing him as another broken man trying to forget his past in the wilderness. His morning coffee tasted bitter, like everything else in his solitary existence. The silence of his cabin pressed against him, filled only by the ticking of Sarah's grandfather clock and the occasional creak of settling timber. Outside, meadowlarks sang their liquid songs, but Jacob heard only echoes of conversations that would never come again. The loneliness had become his constant companion, more faithful than any dog and more persistent than winter cold. He spoke to Sarah's photograph each morning, telling her about his plans for the day, but the one-sided conversations only deepened his isolation. By afternoon, he was mending fence line near Willow Creek when he heard the commotion. Shouts and gunfire echoed from the direction of the old trading post, followed by the thunder of galloping horses. Jacob dropped his hammer and reached for his rifle, scanning the horizon for signs of trouble. That's when he saw her. A young native woman stumbled through the tall grass, clutching her bleeding shoulder. Behind her, 3 riders in cavalry uniforms pursued relentlessly, their horses gaining ground with every stride. The woman's long black hair streamed behind her like a war banner, and her buckskin dress was torn and stained with blood. Jacob faced an impossible choice: help a stranger and risk everything he had built, or turn away and let injustice prevail under his own sky. The smart choice would be to retreat to his cabin and pretend he had seen nothing. But as the woman stumbled and fell just 50 yards from his fence, something deep in his chest awakened for the first time in years. He vaulted the fence and ran toward her, his conscience overruling his caution. The soldiers were closing fast, their faces twisted with bloodlust and racial hatred. Jacob reached the woman first, scooping her up in his arms and carrying her toward his cabin while bullets whistled overhead. But his kindness would soon summon something far greater than gratitude. The woman's name was Morning Star, daughter of Chief Running Bear of the Eastern Apache. Jacob learned this as he carried her bleeding form to his cabin, her weight surprisingly light in his arms. She had been returning from a peace negotiation when rogue soldiers attacked her escort, killing her guards and pursuing her across 20 miles of open prairie. "Why help?" she whispered in broken English as Jacob cleaned her shoulder wound by lamplight. Her dark eyes held a mixture of pain and suspicion, as if kindness from a white man was more dangerous than bullets. "Because it's right," Jacob replied simply, applying fresh bandages with the gentle skill of a man who had once doctored wounded animals. "My wife always said a man's character is measured by what he does when no one's watching." Morning Star studied his weathered face, noting the grief lines around his eyes and the wedding ring he still wore on his calloused finger. "You have lost much," she observed, her voice soft as wind through grass. "Lost everything that mattered," Jacob admitted, surprised by his own honesty. "Been dead inside for 5 years. Maybe helping you is my way of finding something worth living for again." For 3 days, Jacob nursed her back to health, sharing his simple meals and speaking little. She proved intelligent and observant, helping with small tasks despite her injury, and teaching him words in her native tongue. They communicated through gestures, broken English, and the universal language of shared hardship. Morning Star showed him how to prepare healing teas from prairie plants, while Jacob taught her to read simple English words from Sarah's old books. In the evenings, they sat by his fireplace watching flames dance against the stone chimney, finding comfort in companionship neither had expected. On the 3rd evening, Morning Star spoke of her father's desperate attempts to maintain peace with the encroaching settlers. Her mission had been to deliver an offer of cooperation to the territorial governor, but the rogue soldiers had other plans. Colonel Webb, she revealed, had been secretly trying to provoke a war that would justify seizing Apache lands rich in silver deposits. "My people will think I am dead," she said, sorrow weighing her words like stones. "Without the treaty, there will be war. Hundreds will die because 3 evil men wanted gold more than peace." Jacob felt a familiar stir and a purpose he had thought buried with Sarah. This young woman represented more than just a wounded stranger. She was the bridge between 2 worlds teetering on the edge of violence. His choice to help her had already committed him to something larger than his own survival. But their fragile sanctuary was about to shatter. The pounding on Jacob's door came at dawn, accompanied by angry voices and the jangle of spurs. Sheriff Tom Bradley led a posse of 12 men from Copper Ridge, their faces twisted with righteous fury and racial hatred. Among them stood Colonel Marcus Webb, the commanding officer of the local cavalry unit, his uniform pristine despite the early hour. "Open up, McKenna!" Bradley shouted, his fist hammering the wooden door. "We know you're harboring a savage murderer!" Jacob stepped out slowly, his hands visible and empty. Behind him, Morning Star remained hidden in the cabin shadows, but her presence felt as obvious as thunder. The morning air crackled with tension as the assembled men fingered their weapons. "Don't know what you're talking about, Sheriff," Jacob said calmly, though his heart hammered against his ribs. "Just been tending my ranch like always." Colonel Webb stepped forward, his pale eyes cold as January wind. "3 of my soldiers were found dead near Willow Creek, McKenna. Tracks lead straight to your property. You've been aiding and abetting a murderer who butchered good Christian men. Maybe your soldiers shouldn't have been chasing an unarmed woman across open prairie. Maybe they got exactly what they deserved for hunting an innocent person like a wild animal." The words hung in the air like gunpowder smoke. Bradley's hand moved to his pistol grip while the posse shifted restlessly, their horses sensing the rising hostility. In the distance, a red-tailed hawk circled lazily, unaware of the human drama unfolding below. "You're finished in this territory, McKenna," Bradley declared, his voice carrying the authority of judge and jury. "Pack your belongings and be gone by sunset, or we'll burn you out. And if we find that savage, she'll hang from the tallest tree in Copper Ridge before nightfall." The woman was wounded and defenseless. Jacob protested, knowing his words would fall on deaf ears. "She never hurt anyone. This is about Colonel Webb's land grab, not justice." Webb's face flushed with anger. "How dare you question a United States Army officer? You're nothing but a broken-down rancher who's lost his mind in the wilderness. Get out now or face the consequences." As the posse wheeled their horses and galloped away in a cloud of dust and threats, Jacob felt the weight of his choice setting on his shoulders. He had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. The isolation he had endured for 5 years would seem like paradise compared to complete banishment from civilization. But the consequences would prove far different than anyone imagined. That evening, as Jacob prepared for his exile, Morning Star approached him with tears glistening in her dark eyes. From her leather pouch, she withdrew a silver medallion bearing intricate engravings of eagles and mountains. "This belonged to my grandfather, Chief White Thunder," she said, placing it carefully in Jacob's weathered palm. "He wore it when he signed the first peace treaty with your people 30 years ago. It is our most sacred symbol of friendship between nations." Jacob studied the medallion, feeling its weight and significance. The silver was warm from her touch, and the craftsmanship spoke of generations of skill and reverence. Ancient symbols covered its surface, eagles in flight, mountain peaks, and intertwined hands representing unity between peoples. "I can't accept something this precious," he protested, understanding instinctively that he held something worth more than gold. "This belongs to your family, your people." "You must," Morning Star insisted, her voice firm with conviction. "Tomorrow, when my people find you, show them this medallion. Tell them I gave it freely to the white man who risked everything to save Chief Running Bear's daughter. Tell them Jacob McKenna chose honor over safety, compassion over comfort." As Jacob fastened the chain around his neck, the silver medallion seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. Morning Star had slipped away in the pre-dawn darkness, leaving only a blessing whispered in Apache and the promise that their paths would cross again under better circumstances. She had also left a cryptic message. "When the sun rises tomorrow, you will understand why the spirits guided you to help a stranger. Your exile will become your greatest reward." Now, facing 500 warriors in the blazing morning sun, Jacob understood why she had given him the medallion. His banishment from Copper Ridge had been a small price to pay for something infinitely more valuable. The massive Apache warrior with the lightning bolt painted across his chest dismounted slowly, his movements deliberate and ceremonial. As he approached Jacob's porch, the other warriors remained motionless, their horses forming concentric circles of watchful power. The morning air thrummed with the energy of barely contained force. "You are McKenna?" the warrior asked in heavily accented English, his voice deep as distant thunder. "I am," Jacob replied, his hand instinctively moving to the silver medallion beneath his shirt. The metal felt warm against his chest, as if it carried the heat of ancient fires. "I am Thunder Horse, war chief of the Mescalero Apache. My sister Morning Star has told us of your kindness." He gestured toward the assembled tribes with a sweep of his muscled arm. We have come to honor the white man who chose courage over comfort." Jacob slowly withdrew the medallion, holding it up so the morning sunlight could catch its engraved surface and send reflected light dancing across the assembled warriors. A collective murmur rippled through the gathered tribes, and several dismounted and knelt in the dust, their heads bowed in reverence. Thunder Horse's stoic expression cracked into something approaching wonder. "The medallion of Chief White Thunder," he whispered, reaching out to touch it with reverent fingers. "My grandfather's grandfather wore this when he made the first peace with your people. How do you come to possess our most sacred treasure?" "Your sister gave it to me," Jacob said simply, his voice carrying across the silent prairie. The war chief stepped back and raised his voice so all could hear, his words echoing off the distant mountains. "This man protected Running Bear's daughter when soldiers would have killed her. He chose honor over safety, kindness over hatred. The spirits have smiled upon Jacob McKenna." What followed was a ceremony unlike anything Jacob had ever witnessed or imagined. Representatives from all 5 tribes came forward in formal procession, each bearing gifts that represented their people's respect and alliance. The morning sun climbed higher as the ritual unfolded, casting long shadows across the gathered multitude. The Cheyenne brought magnificent horses with ribbons braided in their manes, animals trained for both war and peace. Their leader, a scarred chief named Broken Arrow, spoke of Jacob's courage in Apache before switching to English. "A man who saves one life saves the future of all peoples," he declared. The Comanche offered buffalo robes and silver-worked saddles, their craftsmanship beyond anything Jacob had seen in white settlements. The Navajo presented turquoise jewelry and woven blankets of incredible beauty, each pattern telling the story of their ancestors' migrations across the desert. The Ute contributed weapons of exceptional craftsmanship, a rifle with silver inlays and eagle feathers, arrows tipped with obsidian sharp enough to cut moonbeams, and a tomahawk balanced perfectly for both ceremony and battle. But it was the Apache gift that moved Jacob most deeply. Morning Star herself emerged from behind the warriors, no longer wounded, but radiant in traditional dress adorned with silver conchos and intricate beadwork. Her recovery was complete, but more than that, she carried herself with new authority, as if her ordeal had transformed her from protected daughter to tribal leader. In her arms, she carried a small Apache child, a boy no more than 3 years old, with curious dark eyes and hair black as midnight. The child wore miniature warrior clothing and clutched a carved wooden horse, unafraid of the massive gathering surrounding him. "This is my nephew, Little Eagle," she announced. "His parents were killed in the same attack that wounded me. He has no family left among our people." She looked directly into Jacob's eyes with an intensity that made his breath catch. "I ask you to adopt him as your son, to raise him in both worlds so he can be a bridge between our peoples." Jacob felt his breath catch in his throat. The lonely cabin, the silent meals, the empty conversations with Sarah's memory. All of it could be transformed by this single act of trust. But the responsibility was enormous, the cultural challenges overwhelming. "I don't know your ways," he said quietly, acutely aware that hundreds of warriors hung on his every word. "I don't speak your language. I'm just a broken-down rancher who talks to his dead wife's photograph." Morning Star smiled, the expression transforming her entire face and radiating warmth that seemed to touch every person present. "You speak the most important language of all, kindness. Little Eagle will teach you Apache words, and you will teach him English ones. Together, you will build a bridge that armies cannot destroy." Thunder Horse placed his massive hand on Jacob's shoulder, the gesture both protective and ceremonial. "The boy will spend summers with our people, learning our traditions in the old ways. But his home will be here, with the man who proved that honor has no color and courage knows no boundaries." As Jacob knelt to meet Little Eagle's curious gaze, the child reached out fearlessly and touched the silver medallion hanging around his neck. In that moment, Jacob felt Sarah's presence more clearly than he had in 5 years, as if she were blessing this unexpected gift of fatherhood from beyond the veil of death. The ceremony concluded with a feast that lasted until sunset. 500 warriors sharing food and stories with the banished rancher who had become their brother. As evening stars began to appear in a darkening sky, Thunder Horse made a final pronouncement that would echo across the territory for decades. "Any man who harms Jacob McKenna or Little Eagle will answer to all 5 tribes," he declared, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "This ranch is now under the protection of the Great Alliance. Let all men know that kindness has its own army, and that army is mighty beyond measure." As the warriors prepared to depart, their torches creating rivers of light across the darkening prairie, Morning Star approached Jacob one final time. "You saved more than my life that day," she said softly. Her words meant only for him. "You saved the peace my father died trying to achieve. Because of you, there will be no war this season, and maybe no war ever." Jacob watched the tribes fade into the gathering darkness, their torches becoming distant stars on the prairie horizon. Little Eagle had fallen asleep in his arms, trusting completely in this stranger who had become his father through an act of compassion that would reshape the destiny of 2 peoples. The medallion of Chief White Thunder caught the last rays of sunlight, its silver surface warm against Jacob's chest. Sarah's grandfather clock ticked steadily in the cabin behind him, but it no longer marked empty hours. Instead, it counted moments of purpose, laughter, and love renewed. Sometimes the greatest rewards come disguised as the heaviest losses, and the most profound friendships are born from moments of impossible choice. Would you have risked everything to save a stranger's life, knowing it might cost you your home and your reputation, but could change the course of history itself? Subscribe for more powerful stories like this, and click on the video on the screen to watch the next one with a twist so powerful you'll never forget it.